Let's bring in a panel. I'm joined, as we are each Monday afternoon, by our political strategists Bruce Hooker and Grahame Morris. Welcome to you both. I want to start on the budget, however. Grahame, the last week we've seen the government struggling in many ways to argue why it's doing the various things it's doing in this budget. How do you think their sales effort is going?
Well, look, I don't think anyone could complain that Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott have not been out there having a go. You know, anything that's moved in the media, they've tried to use it to explain the story. This is hard. You know, I was trying to think what it's like. You know, if you've got cancer, if you've got herpes, if you've got leprosy, you know, and you've got to go to the doctor, you know it's going to hurt, you don't want to do it, but you know in the back of your mind it's probably not too bad for you. And I get the impression from the backbench people that they've come back from the electorate, and there's sort of a base of about 30% in the electorate that says, well, we've probably got to do this. There's about 50% who don't like it at all, and there's another 20% that haven't got a clue.
They're not good numbers for the government, are they?
Well, no, they're not. But this is a seriously tough budget, but it had to be. You know, you think in 6 months' time, had they whimpered, everyone would have said, "Oh God, you know, what's wrong with them?" We had all these problems, and they didn't do anything about it. I still think in the end they will get marks for having a go at doing the right thing. My problem is that I suspect in the Senate, and I've got my own chart here of the things where the Greens, Labor Party and Clive Palmer have said no to, and I'm just not quite sure how much of this budget's going to be left standing come August.
Well,
in other words, you know, you take all the political pain for not as much economic gain as you'd hoped, but I still think they will get some marks for having a go, but somebody's got to talk very, very nicely to a few senators.
Yeah, Bruce, how do you think it's going, and indeed Labor's role in this as well? Do you think Bill Shorten is making the most of the opportunity of this budget?
Look, one of the good things I've heard, and just in casual feedback from people I've spoken to, is that they really feel that Bill Shorten's got a lot of fire in his belly. And it's taken him a little while to get to that position, but I think that's to be expected when you're a new opposition leader. I think he's really found his feet with this budget, and so that augurs well for Labor. On the other hand, I know from history, as does Grahame and everybody else who's been around for a long time, that 2.5 years is a long time for people to maintain their rage, as Whitlam once famously invoked. And so I think the challenge for Labor is going to be to keep people remembering and reminding people constantly about what this budget has done or has sought to do, and to work with those groups who have been disaffected by it and disadvantaged by it, not just for the next few weeks, but the next few months and years. That's the big challenge. And we saw in the past, you know, with really tough budgets like the first one that was introduced by John Howard, that Grahame masterminded and was very closely involved in selling successfully. And in the Fraser years, you know, we saw really tough measures and they got re-elected. It's tough for an opposition to maintain that level of anger in the community for that length of time.
Yeah, and a lot, Grahame, as you say, depends on what gets through and what doesn't. Just getting back to that, we heard today Peter Dutton saying they're not going to negotiate on the $7 GP payment. They're not for budging on that. They're not going to make it $6 or $5, $4 or whatever just to get it through. So it's take it or leave it. Chris Pyne is willing to negotiate a bit on some of the, I guess, minor elements of the higher education reform, not the deregulation itself. How should the government be approaching the negotiation in the Senate, do you think?
Well, you know, I just think you've got to try to negotiate. It is better to get something through, you know, get 50% of something than 100% of nothing.
So maybe a $5 co-payment if that's going to win over Clive Palmer.
Well, that's right, but then you'd have to adjust everything else, and it means that, you know, all of these people who think they're going to have a flash medical research fund, you know, maybe that is dwindled to something quite small. So there's a fair bit of that. But I was listening to Bruce before, and he's sort of right with that maintain the rage thing, but one has to be very, very careful. You know, that university stuff last week, and it is just surprising at times the small number of brains that seem to be shared by a hell of a lot of university students. and you think, well, there's a way of protesting, but there was a few days there where it looked as if they were going to turn what they thought was an issue back against them. You know, Australians don't like ratbags protesting. Yeah, have a protest. But all of that stuff was just bad television.
Yeah, look, I wasn't saying that literally. What I meant was, and maintain is really important, is that Labor keeps reminding the electorate about how tough this is for students, for pensioners, for people who get sick, for any number of people in the community, particularly families, who really have been exposed to what is a pretty grim sort of a view about how Australia should operate under this government. That's the challenge for Labor, and they will have to work with all those groups constantly between now and 2016 to have a prospect of being the first opposition to defeat an incumbent government in one term since the Great Depression.
All right, now, Richard Marles is the Shadow Immigration Minister. As I mentioned earlier, we're standing by to hear from him in relation to the independent report on the Manus Island riot. It's been released to warnings that were made to the government. And the report does talk about, I mentioned this earlier, the G4S, the local operators of the centre at the time, pushed for some security enhancements at the centre, such as stronger fences, better lighting and CCTV coverage. But these requests were not accepted or have not yet been implemented. Grahame Morris, how do you view this whole thing? The riot that took place there, was it inevitable given the sheer number of people on the rush in setting this up, which did happen under Labor's watch? Should more have been done to beef up security and make sure the fences and the cameras were all there to stop this sort of thing happening? What do you think?
This is not going to come out right, but we shouldn't forget that we are talking about the death of one person here, and that's sad. But the whole point of all of this was to avoid thousands of deaths in the open sea.
And the minister's made that point too.
And I watched, you know, Richard Marles there is not a bad operator, but even he would have been squirming and have to go out and sell that. You know, what was he saying? That we should have more security people? Well, they were part of the problem. That we should have more local people involved? They were part of the problem. Local police? They were there. The illegal migrants themselves? They caused the problem. Bring in the Salvation Army. Oh, they were part of the problem too. You know, this is not easy. But let's just think about what we got here. This is not a teddy bear's picnic. You have people who don't want to be there, who've come to this place illegally. They are stuck in this Manus Island place, and they just don't want to be there. Of course there's going to be tension.
And Bruce, that's what I want to ask you about, because you were there with Kevin Rudd at his right hand when this pivotal policy shift was taken to resettle asylum seekers in PNG, so they would have no chance of ever returning to Australia. That's what obviously created a lot of anger, anxiety, frustration amongst the asylum seekers. Wasn't it inevitable that some sort of riot like this, I'm not saying a fatal one, but some sort of riot like this was always going to be a possibility?
Well, whenever you put a lot of very unhappy people together in one place and lock them in, there's a fair chance you're going to get some sort of violent altercation. That happens. It doesn't just happen on Manus Island. It happens in prisons and detention centres all around the world. So I think we're stating the bleeding obvious in a sense.
Yeah, but at least those in jail have an idea how long they're going to be there, what's going to happen at the end of it. You know, I've got 5 years or 10 years to go on my sentence, and then this will happen. My kids, I'll be with them. These people don't have any of that certainty. That's what's creating a lot of the problem, isn't it?
I think that's right. But on the other hand, as Grahame pointed out, the key policy decision that was taken here was to stop this flow of people across the water, many of whom were drowning, and many of whom would have continued to drown had something not happened. Now, we can argue about whether it should have happened sooner or later or whatever, but I think most people accept that something dramatic had to be done to send a message to people smugglers that there was no point in getting onto those leaky boats because you weren't going to come to Australia, and that required a very, very strong message at the other end. And of course,
for
some of these people...
I mentioned earlier, And that seems to have worked. I mean, the boats haven't come all year, and clearly offshore processing is a key part of the deterrent. But just one thing the report points out, and this was part of the structure of this system that Labor put in place, 50% of the staff have to be local PNG. And for those who are doing the cleaning, cooking, gardening, it has to be 75% local. Now, obviously, that was done to keep the locals happy. You know, they're having to accommodate this big centre and all of these problems. But Grahame, is that part of the problem, do you think? Should Australians be running this Australian centre?
No. Part of it, why PNG agreed to all of this, was that it helped created local jobs, local economy. And yeah, look, you would hope this sort of thing would never happen, but you can't just bring in a whole heap of Australians and have an Australian enclave there. Incidentally, this report, by the look of it, dubbed by Robert Cornell, he's actually a good man. And by the look of it, he's done a pretty thorough job, and quite a sensational job, really. And sensational in the sense of it is sensational. The next step, of course, is up to the PNG government and the PNG police as to who gets charged for doing what.
And that's
we don't know yet.
We don't want to jump the gun there, because that's up to the PNG police to follow through all of that. Look, I just want to finish up on a couple of other things that have been happening here in Parliament House today. Senate estimates this week, which always provides plenty of fodder. There's been a change in the security procedures here at Parliament House. It won't surprise you to know that all of us who work here have to go through the scanners like you do at the airport every time you come into the building. It's no different any major building around the world, any parliament in particular. But just this week they've made a change where about half, in fact, of pass holders, building occupants, don't have to be screened. MPs, their staff, public servants, the families of MPs, they don't have to be screened. Journalists do, Grahame, lobbyists do, diplomats and their staff do. But it is a big change in the security of this building, and Bill Heffernan, the Liberal Senator, is very worried about this, and he made his point in quite dramatic fashion today. Have a look.
And up until this point, most people working in this building know that it's safe. I don't think it any longer is. And to demonstrate that, this morning I brought in what could be, I brought this through security, a pipe bomb. I also brought in, at the present time, there's nothing to stop anyone from bringing those ingredients in here over a period of time through security. Would you agree?
Well, Senator, under the current arrangements, that is a risk, yes.
So I just thought, through you, Mr Chairman, that I should demonstrate today what a joke the security has turned to in this building.
Now, Grahame, you can laugh about what he's done there, but he's making a pretty serious and good point there, isn't he? That, yes, we'd all like to have faith that MPs and their families and their staff and all the public servants aren't going to do this sort of thing, but it's a big change in security.
Look, there are times when there are a lot of people who would think that there should be the SAS, the Dog Squad and the Queensland Rugby League team between Bill Heffernan and the entrance to the Parliament. But look, it was all brought in once we had the terror attacks both in Bali, in the US and whatnot. It is a slightly different and slightly more relaxed and slightly more Australian climate now. And
well, is it? I mean, we're not told that the terror security threat has changed.
Well, I think it's different. We haven't got too many aeroplanes flying into buildings lately. But, look, I don't mind that the politicians wear a little badge. The security people know who the hell they are. The staffers
and the public servants. And
I've been wearing one of those security tags for 30 years to get in and out of this building. It doesn't hurt.
It's apparently to save about $400,000. But Bruce, you've worked in and around this building for a long time as well. You think it's worth it?
Look, I actually agree with Bill Heffernan, I've got to say, even though it's lucky we don't have a policy of lethal response amongst the parliamentary attendants, otherwise there'd probably be a casual vacancy in the New South Wales Liberal Party right now. But, you do have to be really careful about these sorts of things, and I don't think it's asking too much for people to be screened when they come through Parliament House, whoever they are. Well, yeah, with maybe some
No.
exceptions, but as a general proposition, I think he's right.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris, always good to talk to you both. Thanks very much for that. In our next